Hey guys, I'm back. So you guys are going to be learning your second data type today. Integers, you guys already learned what strings were and how to use them in outputs. So now we're going to learn how to do math and also use integers in your output. We're going to be learning a new arithmetic operator called the modulo operator. So yeah, let's get straight into it. All right, so to start the lesson, I'm going to go through the same process. I'm going to grab a base code folder, copy it onto my desktop, Control C, Control V. You guys have done this before. And inside here, I'm going to open with Notepad++, right? So today's lesson is on integers. You guys learned string last time, and another data type I'm going to teach you guys. Actually, I'll write it here one more time, the formula. Right? And so this time the data type we're learning, instead of string, is going to be int, or integer. Right? And if you guys know from math, an integer is just any whole number. Right? It could be 0 as well. So let's say I have int num apples. All right? Equals 10. Right? So I can system.out.print and print num apples. And you guys can already guess what this does, but I'll save and run for you guys. Right? And it outputs 10 because I said num apples is equal to 10, and I'm just printing num apples. Right? So, but what's the difference between an int and a string, right? I can have a, let's say, string, right? And then like apples as well. But put this in quotes and say 10, right? These would output the exactly same thing if I put apples in here, right? Save, compile and run. I'm just going quick because you guys already know this stuff. And I'll get 10. So what is the difference between these two? Why does the data type matter? And this data type allows us to do different things with what we have. That sounded really vague, but I'm going to show you right now. With a string, you can't do math on it like you would with an integer. Right? So in here, if I type num apples one more time, I can add 2. So I say plus 2. So now if I save and I print, what's going to happen? It's going to say 12. You can't do that with the string because the string is just, a word, right? I can't say like apples plus peaches. What does that even mean, right? But because 10 is an integer and it reads it as an integer, I'm able to do arithmetic operators with them, right? And because 10 is an integer, I'm able to do math with it, right? So I can, of course, I can do all the other kind of math stuff. That print line, right? And just be careful, okay? When I print this out, you guys can pause here and try to guess what the answer is going to be, but it should be pretty obvious. I feel like some people might get confused between what happens to your variables. And sometimes your compiler does is just close it and run it again if it's not compiling quickly. A lot of people would assume that num apples is changing here, all right? It changes to 12 and thinks it goes back to 10. But what's really happening is we're just making temporary math statements here, right? Num apples is still 10. Just because I added 2 in this output doesn't mean that it's 12. Num apples is permanently 12, right? Num apples is still 10. So when I subtract 2, it goes to 8. And so this goes for, obviously there's, subtraction and division and multiplication. So I have those all here for you guys. It kind of multiplied by 2, divided by 2, right? So if I save, we should get 12, 8, 20, and 5, right? 12, 8, 20, and 5. But there's a caveat to division here, right? Remember I told you that integers are only whole numbers. So what happens when, actually, let me leave this here. I'll just grab a new print statement. What happens if I divide this by 3, right? Because 10 divided by 3 doesn't give you a pretty whole number. So what does it return? And Java, by default, always rounds down, all right? So when I do 10 divided by 3 and I compile and run, it's going to give me 3, because 10 divided by 3 is 3 remainder 1, right? So it's always going to round down no matter what. So if I change this to 4, it'll give me 2. Right? Because it doesn't mess with all those decimals. We'll get into how to make decimals and whatnot later when we get into doubles. But for now, everything's a whole number, and you always have to remember Java floors or rounds down your division. And this follows all the same rules as math. You guys know PEMDAS and whatever. It follows the order of operations, so just be aware of that. So if I'm doing system.out.print and I have like num apples plus 10 divided by 4, what do you guys think this would return? You guys can pause here and try figuring this out on your own. This is basically what your lab is going to be, so just try getting used to these simple ones first. Right? So I'm going to print, what would this be? This should be 12, right? Right? Because 10 divided by 4 would be 2 remainder 2, right? And when I'm adding 10 plus 2, you get 12, because divisions always comes first in the order of operations. If you got 5, because 10 plus 10 is 20, divided by 4 is 5, you're doing it wrong because you're not following PEMDAS. This isn't really coding, this is more math. I'm just trying to get it inside your head and make that connection for you guys. And we're going to learn one more arithmetic operator called the modulo operator. And the modulo operator looks like a percentage sign. Alright? So if I'm printing num apples again, and then I say, let's go back here. And we say divided by 4. This gave us 2, right? Because it was, actually this is a bad example. Let's say 3. 10 divided by 3 would be 3 remainder 1. All modulo does, which is shown through a percentage sign, is it gives you that remainder. So instead of 10 divided by 3 is 3 remainder 1, and returns 3, it would say 3 remainder 1 returns 1. And this returns the remainder of the division that you're doing. So if I change this to 4, the reason why this is a bad example because both of them are 2, but I'll show you guys anyway. Right? It'd be 2 because it's 2 remainder 2. There's a lot of reasons why I'd use modulo. I know you guys can think off the top of your heads why you would add or subtract or divide and whatnot, but there's a lot of uses for modulo too, especially in coding. I can give you a few examples of its usefulness. So I can get rid of all this right now. I'll keep num apples. So let's say I wanted to print one more time. System.out.print num apples. So there are a few tricks, and one of them you guys can try figuring out on your own would be the modulo 2 operator. So you guys can pause the video here and try thinking about why modulo 2 is special and why it's a trick in programming. Alright, and so that reason is because this will always return a 1 or a 0, which you can think of it as even or odd. So it would have, if the answer is 0, it'd be even, and if odd, if it's 1, it's odd. And you can think about why. Anything divided by 2 is either going to give you 0 as a remainder or 1 as a remainder, right? And if it's an even number, it's going to give you, like 10 divided by 2 is 5, remainder 0. And if it's 11, it'll give you 11 divided by 2, which is 5, remainder 1. So it tells you between even and odd, or, maybe true or false and whatnot. It's however you want to use it. But no matter what number num apples is, the modulo 2 will always return 0 or 1, depending on if it's even or odd. There's one more I can think of, and that would be modulo 10. So you can pause the video here one more time if you want to think about why modulo 10 is special. Okay? And what this one does is it always returns the number in the ones place, alright? So I'll put returns num in ones place, right? And if you just think about what dividing by 10 does, right? If you, like a little trick in math, let's say you have like a number like this, when you divide something by 10, because there would be a decimal here, right? When you divide by 10, you kind of move the decimal to the left one. And that's kind of like the quote-unquote trick when you're dividing by 10. Or when you multiply by 10, you just add a 0. Same thing here. When I'm doing modulo 10, all it's doing is it's getting this number, and this becomes its remainder, right? So if I have like, let's do an easier, like 15. 15 divided by 10 equals 1, and then remainder 5, right? It gives you that ones place no matter what it is. So if this is 17, 17 divided by 10 is 1 remainder 7, right? So and just for reference, this holds the same level or like priority in PEMDAS as it does with division and multiplication. So if it's like PEMDAS, it'd be like PEMDAS. I don't know, whatever you want to do. Just know that it's parentheses, exponents, like multiplication, modulo, division, right? These kind of have like their own 3, and then their own 3, and then addition and subtraction, right? It belongs in that category. Right, so that pretty much wraps up the lessons on integers and the modulo operator. Because you'll be using this a lot, and the lab is going to be basically testing you on PEMDAS and how to use it in programming. Just keep in mind of rounding down with division and your order of operations. So there's one little thing. I don't know if you guys are watching and you've noticed. If you've noticed, good for you. If you haven't, you're with like 99% of all the people watching. Way earlier when I was teaching you guys about system.out.print, I told you guys that system.out.print takes in a string, but I should bring numapples back. Right? System.out.print line takes out a string, but numapples isn't a string. So why is it that when I'm printing an integer, it prints out 12, right? Or I guess if I not 12, it prints out 10. So let's have like a trick question. So let's say I have a string a equals, let's say Tony has, right? And system.out.println. Let's get a string plus numapples plus 4, right? Earlier when we use system.out.print, when I said plus, I was connecting two strings together, if you guys remember. So I would say Tony has, and I'd say plus like 10 apples, right? This is how I connected strings in the past, well, in the past videos. But earlier I was saying num apples and then plus 10 would be 20 apples, right? So how is this plus used? When is it used to connect strings, and when is it used for integers? And going back to what it was before, what happens when this happens, right? When a is a string, num apples is an integer, and I'm adding 4. So am I connecting two strings together, or am I doing addition? You can't add 4 to apples, right? Like the literal number 4 to the word apples. So you guys can pause the video here. You guys can take a guess, right? What do you guys think the output would be? I'll give you a hint. It doesn't error. This doesn't return an error. This will print. All right. So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to print. Right? And it says I have 104. I didn't even put apples. My bad. Well, anyway, you guys get the point. I was supposed to put apples here, but Tony has 104. Why is it 104? Well, what println is doing, why we're able to print num apples, even though it's an integer, when it should be a string in order to print out to the screen, is it's converting an integer to a string. Java's doing this for you because Java's being nice, and they're not making you do all the process yourself. It automatically, behind the system, converts it to a string for you. And this is just some of the stuff that you guys are going to have to memorize over time, right? And what's happening here is it detects that this is a string. A is a string, and I'll put it here in comments. The plus for connecting strings always has a greater like priority over the plus for math. All right. So what I mean by that is earlier we didn't know if this would connect the strings or if it would do the math, but because connecting strings takes a priority over the addition symbol, right? Because A is a string, and because A is a string, it's going to take precedence over the plus operator in math. So what this is going to do is it's going to convert num apples into a string and 4 into a string. So what's really happening here is instead of num apples like this, what's really happening is it's doing 10 and 4 just behind the scenes and you can't see it. But Java's doing this on its own in the background. So that's why when we're looking at this print line, we see Tony has, right, A, Tony has, and then 10, 4. So it looks like 104. So just keep that in mind when you're programming, that when you're putting, when you're trying to do math in a print line, make sure it's purely math, right? That's why I suggest you not to do math in your print lines, just for this reason, right? You can easily just do math up here. I mean, there's no reason to ever do this. I would just put 14, but I'm just showing you guys it's not smart to put math in your print line because it's doing that little trick for you, right? So that wraps up today's lesson. Let's get to the lab. Right, so I'm going to close this and get rid of this base code folder. Let's go to int, notes, and the PDF. Right, all the way down, we have the lab. All right, so this is your lab. Remember earlier I was doing that complicated order of operations question. It's not really complicated, it was just 2. But he gives you a lot here. I highly suggest, and so does Dr. Neat, he wants you to do these math problems with a pencil and paper so you can you can solve your question without your computer having to do it, right? Because if you just plug this into your computer, yes, you'll get the right answer. The computer's never wrong, right? But you want to make sure that what's going through your head is the same as what's being outputted on the screen. So yeah, let's get started on your lab, guys. Good luck.